for their attitude is to be recontact the subject again for take the approval for the stored biological to use the biological samples. 45% they stated no restrictions. However, subjects should have the right to withdraw their samples. 27% of the participants. And the interesting here that 92% of the subject, they need to know to be notified of results that may be relevant to their health, and 52% for the commercial gain. Now, this is the slide showing you the factors important in giving permission for storage of biological samples. What's interesting here that almost the same percentage, 44%, 40 and 47, people are willing to send the samples outside Egypt or even to Western countries or to Arabian countries for doing research on them. This is the last slide. For the transfer and ownership of the samples, 94% of the participants, their opinion is to keep some or a portion of their samples in the source country. However, 90% need to have an access to resulting materials products. And interesting to see here that as for the ownership of the samples, that 59% of the participants need to have their opinion that the source of the institution he is the owner of these samples. In summary, as for the participation in biomedical research, high level of support by Egyptians for research. Major reason not to participate in research are whether there are fear and lack of trust, lack of comprehension, social stigma, high level of support for storage of biological samples for future research. As for the biological samples, desire for knowledge on the type of future research they need to know. Most would like to be recontacted for future research. Most of the participants would like to retain the right to commercial gain, and also their opinion concerning the ownership belongs to the home country institution. Further studies to understand reasons for the desire for recontact. And third, it's to determine whether results are generalizable to other sectors in Egypt or not. At the end, I would like to acknowledge the Ministry of Health and Population in Egypt for facilitating and giving us the permission to do this work in the northern Sinai. Also, the Research and Training Center where I am working in Egypt, which is headed by Professor Hany Silverman. This project is funded by the NIH for the International Foundation for covering the funds of this project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's time for some.
Thank you, Dr. Magdi, for this very interesting result that I had been with you for last 4 days, and I don't know this result. I'm surprised about you said that in your result that there is 44% they are agreed to send the biological stored sample outside and even to the Western country. And for the Arab country, it's 49%. I don't know if it is, I want your comment because it surprised me if the place of that your research was done and the questionnaire was done, and because they are literature or I don't know why this percentage. It's 44 for the Western country and 49 for the Arab country. Your comment on this?
Yeah, the reason for that, thank you, Brian. the facilities to do it in your own country. And also, some people say that you can send it to other countries instead of the European. And you have in the survey questionnaire multiple questions, so they can choose from everyone what they need to answer.
Like, you showed that 27% of the participants they withdrew during your survey. 27% of the participants they withdrew. How will you take it? I mean, the moderate number of withdrawals, low or high? If I myself take it as a moderate or more than moderate number of the withdrawals, what's your opinion about that? 27% withdrawals.
You see it.
I myself will take it as moderate or even more than moderate.
Yeah.
How will you take it?
This figure, the 27%, if you look at the first slide here on the results, that out of 260 participants, only 229 completed the survey questionnaire, and this is the rest representing 27%.
I mean, in a good study, the participant should be satisfied with the researcher. If the number of the withdrawals is more than moderate number, what will you say about that?
I can tell you
When the withdrawal is more than moderate, when there are too many people they are withdrawing from the research, how will you take it?
Oh, you mean if the sample size is bigger than that? I can't understand the question.
That was, it wasn't 27% who dropped out of the study. 27% stated they would like to retain the right to withdraw the samples if they participate in research involving stored biological samples. Does that clarify?
I
No.
don't know what was the slide. It was about
Let me say it again in the same way, but in a louder tone.
Maybe you can take this up in break. There's a question. Quality of life we have.
Oh yeah, they have a very primitive life. That's a remote area where they're alive. You see them on the photo.
Do they have a special disease or?
They rely some plantation or something in the area.
I'm looking that you've done this definitely, you mentioned it's a rural setting and the level of education is really low. Would you expect any differences if you were to conduct this in an urban setting?
We have another to see the comparison. So it's a part of the big project.
Okay, Dr. Moazam, then Darren, then Farhat.
Okay, just a question. Based on the literacy level, etc., one of the issues was biological samples. I'm trying to see if I was to do this in a village in Pakistan, what would they really understand by biological sample?
Yeah, biological sample will include the blood sample, urine sample, a hair or stool, urine, whatever sample, it's a biological sample, or even the biopsy is a biological sample.
Yeah, but I would see a difference between a biopsy versus maybe a stool sample. So it's just a question of the understanding, because we face the same problems.
Yes.
Biological samples is kind of very, very broad. Would also include things like genetic
Well, you
material.
can just identify the biological sample in your country, and this is how you go for a biological sample, but it's actually most of the definitions of the biological samples include biopsy, urine, blood samples.
I'm just saying that they're very different, and what was the understanding?
Okay, Darren?
I'm interested in and on Monday we had a presentation from David about the cell banks, DNA banks in Tel Aviv, and with multiple samples and populations. So I'm wondering how many of the Bedouin that you sampled are mobile and moving across into the Negev, Sinai, across the region, across national boundaries. Their genetic compositions and the similarities between those in Israel, Palestine, Sinai, and so on, and Jordan. And then also whether you asked the people if the ideas of submitting a sample to a biological material to a bank in Israel. Now, politically, it could be stopped, but it would be very interesting.
Politically, it's very difficult. But the thing is, I think there are many people working with the Saleem group, atmospheric centers, and they are doing a lot of work together. And I know this, there is any genetic barrier concerning this remote area, and this area actually is only 10 kilometers from the Palestinian border. We don't know what's going on there.
For IRBs is you have to tell people that they are in a research project. So how do you get across the concept of research? Is there such a word in Arabic? Is there such a word in Urdu? How do you address that? And how do you avoid separating that from the notion of that people think that they're being treated and this is part of the treatment? I've been meaning to ask this all day, and now that I have all of you there on the panel, I'll ask the panel.
Why don't you start?
I should say, by the way, that we have a number of ethics cases where the investigator does not want to use that word. Either it doesn't translate into the language, or the very word itself has very strong negative connotations. So how did you deal with it?
Well, I think is the word research. You may have a good treatment way, or you have a drug that will be much more effective. That's the type of research, and that's.
So there's a degree of therapeutic misconception.
Yes. So that's actually deceptive. You don't really know if this is research. You don't know. It may actually not be helpful for them. There is a question mark when you're doing research rather than therapy. If you're going to this Bedouin and then you're offering them what you're calling treatment, obviously that person is going to say yes to everything, that whatever you want. You want to do a liver biopsy, or they will say yes, take my liver biopsy, but give me those drugs.
No, the point here, how you explain what's the research for them. What?
The word, to be more specific, Richard, in Urdu is tajriba. And that comes from, it has pretty certain Arabic roots. Tajriba means an experiment or a research. And most researchers will really not use that word. Because if you do that, if you use the word tajriba, nobody wants you to do tajriba on them. So the other word is, which is a softer word, is tahqiq, which is another Urdu word which is used more often. And that is more into, kind of, it's a softer word, but then you have to explain it. And that it goes back again to my earlier question that, things like biological products or samples, to explain it to individuals who don't speak English is extremely difficult, and I think we do end up with the therapeutic misconception that you're talking about. And I think that's...
Hany wants to respond, and then we go to the question.
Arabic language, like an Urdu.
There are people who live in a remote place and non-educated situation. In that case, you think that, for example, for the biological sample using for the genetic research, how to explain that? Is it you think that got real consent from them? That is so difficult to.
Yeah, I know it was difficult actually, but the thing is, we explained that as that how the genetics, like gene or people they can have the different type of life and things like that. You know, that's the we had to cover the whole aspects in the questionnaire.
I had a question. Rana had a question, then maybe we can go on to, there was a question from there as well. So question, because we seem to be run out of time. Yes, last question.
You mentioned the people were poor in education, they're living in very poor huts.
Yes.
I'd like to know what level of education, you know, primary, lower primary, upper primary, were they able to have contact with newspapers or television? I'm querying whether they can understand the whole project, or whether they're saying yes to please the doctors.
Well, as I presented here, that 23 of this population are illiterate, and the rest are having, they know just to write and read.
There appears to be this underscores the validity of the whole research.
In a lot of these patients,
Many disease in that area, so they know what's the benefit of doing this kind of research and how benefit of them, because we treat them when they have cases or something.
Thank you. Seems to have initiated a dialogue that wouldn't stop, but I think we need to stop. Thank you very much.
For the public, as opposed to the individual participant or citizen. So I thought what we would do in the last half hour is just to see if there's any issues that you would like to see raised, or that you feel that we have not adequately addressed in the discussion today. Because there is this notion, there is this, I don't know whether it's a conflict or whether it's a different way to view health, but one looks, the public health perspective does look at health from a population base. It's the whole notion of public health. And does this conflict with individual rights? And if it does, how do we adjudicate that difference? I started out this morning with a discussion of, as it applies to infectious disease, identification, treatment, control, and research. But then we've touched on all sorts of other issues for the day. So let me just open it up and see if there's any issues that you would like to see addressed in the half hour that we have left for the afternoon. Please. Okay. Maybe if what you could do is just go to the mics and we'll just have you, yeah, why don't you go to the mic and we'll...
Distinction between public health ethics and public health research ethics. And I spoke on public health research ethics as that was what I was asked to speak on. But as I mentioned in my talk, as you mentioned in your talk, the distinction between public health practice and research is a very fuzzy one. And I guess I'd like to put it to the group that it's not a distinction that's useful, and that it's better to go for an overarching public health ethics, which you then apply to public health practice, including help consolidate if we're trying to do two separate sets of ethical issues.
Well, the dilemma occurs, just to review, is that, you know, is there a distinction that we should make between public health practice and public health ethics? The dilemma involves who approves of what it is that you're doing. If it's defined as research, we have established this whole scaffolding of approval mechanisms and so on, which, you know, one could argue that really a protective mechanism. So that's where we end up. That was the dilemma I tried to pose with surveillance. When is it surveillance and when is it research? And this came out of a dialogue we had at WHO, and I can tell you that the people who do surveillance do not want this defined as research. They, you know, except in the most extreme examples. That I think is where we have this dilemma. I don't know how to deal with it. Anyone else?
Well, I'd like to respond to
Yes.
Wendy a little bit. I don't think it's useful to divide the ethics of public health practice and research, because in public health, all the research is done just to solve problems, operational research, applied research, so it's part of the game anyway, so it's the same rule. If you try to separate the ethics and the practice of public health from the ethics of research of public health, I don't know what we're doing anymore. That would be my response.
I'll put in one other, I'm not sure I totally agree with that. I mean, what happens in clinical medicine? Let's say I want to try out a new procedure. I can do a therapeutic innovation. I can try out a new suture. I can even try out a whole new surgical procedure.
It's medicine.
Yeah, but you can get away with it without calling it research. Absolutely you can. Absolutely.
No, in Australia, we're clamping down on that.
No, well, you're clamping down on it. But you can do that sort of.
I think there's a lot of challenges with that, and I think the examples we had from the Philippines, particularly the filariasis one, where you just kind of introduce, that was therapeutic. You know, let's cure this disease, and yet it wasn't. It was with a new innovation, and it wasn't collecting the data that that you really needed.
Okay.
Yeah. So.
Well, you pose a very interesting question. Yeah, go ahead.
You're saying you can try a new suture, and you can do this sort of thing. In Australia, in IVF clinics, for example, even if you want to slightly change the incubation medium to perhaps improve it, you have to go through the whole ethic protocol.
Well,
so you can't just do things on the hop like that.
Okay, well, let me tell you, that's not the way it works in an awful lot of places. I mean, there are stem cell clinics going up all over the place. There are all sorts of, you have no idea, under the guise of therapeutic innovation. No IRB, no nothing. Yes?
Sir, as I was working on my paper, I tried to coordinate with the Xavier University who approved the situation. I tried to retrieve the protocol, but they don't want to release it. Is there any other way that it can be retrieved so the protocol can be reviewed again? And another thing, knowing that Germany had been where the Helsinki Code had been originated, and I had also known that amalgam is already prohibited in Germany, the reason why they did the research in the Philippines. So this research is very much questionable. Is there any other way I can get a copy of this protocol?
So you're asking two questions. Can you get a copy of the protocol that was, done in Germany?
Yes.
Is that right?
From the Xavier University, to which I don't think they don't want to release it on me.
And the other question is there another place that you can go for ethical review?
For a review of this situation. All medical practitioners, and this is a dental research to which I am a licensed dentist in the Philippines. Right? So the question here is who is more, who have the right to hold this protocol? Is it the medical health or the dental health agency?
Right or
obligation?
Obligation. I'm not sure, because if it's through your institution, then that institution will define who has the right. It may not be fair, probably isn't fair, but I don't know what other recourse you have, quite honestly. I'm sorry to be so negative, but that's all I can think of, unless you go to the court of public opinion.
Prevention and the treatment about the patients. We have a dilemma. If we encourage the people who suspect he got the HIV positive, they can go to hospital to check, to have a test whether or not, but we can without the name, without the address. But what things happen now is the many, a few provincial ask the person to give the name because the public health and the harm to others. So this is the dilemma. So we have the same principles about this. So how to solve such a problem is the contradiction of the premises that the personal interest and the public interest.
So your concern is that people can come to the clinic and get an HIV test, but you don't have to write their name down.
Because even though the climate is better and better in China, from the policy of government is better and better, but the many positive persons go out and have no way to trace them.
Well, this is one of the great dilemmas I think that we have seen with HIV/AIDS. There are some people who feel that this is AIDS exceptionalism. Then why do we not record people's names for this, but we do it for other conditions and other diseases? I'm not sure I can give you a satisfactory answer, except to tell you that it's very different in very different places. In some countries, for example, if the doctor finds out, let's say he does a test, let's say I go in and they do a test on me and I'm HIV positive. In some countries, the doctor is prohibited, he is prohibited by law from informing the partner of that individual. He can't do it under law. In other countries, he must inform the partner that this person is positive. In some countries, you can, when you go to a hospital, you must say, yes, I want to be tested. In other countries and institutions, you have to say, no, I don't want to be tested. The number of people who are tested goes up significantly, as opposed to saying, I want you to test me, rather than, I don't want you to test me. You get very, very different results. I feel that in this area alone, the differences are huge and are very contextual, are very, very much defined by both the internal values and the external values of the powerful forces that have lots of money for this particular condition. This is a highly funded condition, whether or not you have the problem or not. And if you are dependent upon outside sources, you tend to follow those outside guidelines. So that's a cynic's view of the whole field. This is one field which has not followed a lot of the time-honored public health principles, contact tracing, a whole variety of different things, because it has been defined as a stigmatizing illness. I want to remind everybody that mental illness, I can't think of a more stigmatizing illness than this. So this goes on and on and on. AIDS is not, by any stretch of the imagination, the only stigmatizing illness, but it has developed its own ethical cult. Yes, I would say ethical cult. Now, I'm going to get beaten up for this, but that's the way I feel.
How about that?
Let me stop at this point. Thank you for that question.
I prefer to the notion of population-based bioethics because it's different settings encounters from clinical settings of just a physician-patient relationship. So we need a new paradigm because this is settings, more and more new issues, dilemmas emerge. But it seems that the old principles, for clinical research, assumes and this kind of guidelines, it seems impossible. These old principles is adequate for all these new dilemmas and issues. So I think it's in this new paradigm, we place common good, public good, solidarity is kind of valued in highest. It's justifiable because it's different settings and it's a new paradigm. It's different from the old paradigm. But we have the same. It's a value configuration. But just in this paradigm, we place common good the highest. But it doesn't mean that we don't respect individual liberties and individual interests. And from this perspective, self, it's different. It's a metaphysics notion of self. Self in relationship, just like from feminist perspective, and the individual and the self is embedded in social context. So this.
So you're saying that societies are are quite different the way they view the individual versus the group.
In these settings, yeah.
How would you arrive at that? Because there have been lots of attempts at coming up with, general principles, whether it's Helsinki or this or that, saying this is the way we all should behave. But now you're suggesting that in fact context is really, really critical here in terms of developing your public health ethics. How would you go about doing it? Would you have
clinical ethical issues, and also in different countries? Because in Eastern countries, we always place, common good and individual duties, to society in high esteem. So when we lay down some public health policies, so we should be more careful to, some kind of more restrictive and more justifiable policies on, individual liberties. So very.
You've opened up a very interesting idea. Any thoughts on this? That is, there are different societies, and people have said throughout, context is very important, place a different sense of value on the individual rights or the individual's obligations to the overall society. Some say your obligation is to pay taxes. And others say, well, no, you have a deeper obligation. Certainly Confucius thought says that obligation and duty are very important.
Yeah. For example, during the outbreak of SARS, in China, most people say it's quite reasonable. You put suspected cases, these people, and some people just, came back from the infected areas from Beijing. We put them in the same building. This is to protect receptive and give more considerations on individuals' interest.
Okay.
It's in different culture, I think. Yeah.
Okay, that's a very intriguing thought. Yeah.
It's not either or. I think one of the issues is that we have to, as human beings, we have to have common values. Some values we agree on, otherwise there's no conversation. So, it's not what I presented. That's not the only way of doing it. And my criticism of contemporary bioethics is very often, it presents itself as this is the only paradigm within which you can work. But, going back to it, therefore, the issues of duties, one would like to see more together with the rights. So what Ryan was just talking about, to me, I don't see it as either or. I mean, SARS would be taken care of in a different way, maybe in China or in Pakistan. And, you could come from the issue of moral obligations. I'm not sure what the argument...
Well, because, as you know, that certain, for example, when the SARS outbreak came and when China embarked on their control strategy, there were many who said no one but China or societies with a similar set of values could have done what they've done. That had the United States been faced with this, it would have been every man for himself and or a woman for himself or what have you. And what we tend to do oftentimes is speak disparagingly of societies that have taken on a different approach than the one that we approve of.
Yeah,
So, is there room for defining your public health ethics in a different way?
I'm not talking to public health. Exactly what you said right now, the issue of looking at things disparagingly, and as you said, you know, there should be a way where one doesn't do that. We live different lives, but we share common values. But when you get beyond that to context, I think there should be an understanding that there are different ways, obviously, within the society. No system, Pakistani system of duties is not perfect. But we within the society have to learn to criticize it and say, look, this is how we need to move ahead. We should have duties, etc. But at the same time, let's learn from some of the things about, you know, human rights and what respect for persons is like. So I guess maybe because I'm not in public health.
Okay.
I want to say something in the context of HIV/AIDS identified. We have a second generation surveillance program in place, and you know, very high rates of infectivity were identified in say intravenous drug users or some sex workers. But due to the sensitivities you know, associated with HIV, the whole HIV/AIDS thing, nothing was done in terms of public health, changing public health policies, or even, you know, making basic changes there. And now what's happened is that we've started seeing a spillover into the general population. So you know, and the public health policies are quite unchanged. You know, there's nothing is happening in that context. So, what does one do? I mean, how do we bring any change there?
I'll weigh in again. I guess I have the mic. It's so easy for me to get the mic here. I still go back to, as you can tell from my background, to evidence-based public health and evidence-based medicine. And I think when we throw those policies, I think that one of the dilemmas that you are expressing is just this. Had these issues been openly talked, we have in some ways created, it has become a self-fulfilling prophecy. That is, we don't want to talk about it, and so we don't talk about it, and it becomes even more difficult to talk about it because of the stigma that we have created around the issue. Yes, anything that has to do with sex has its, we want to keep in the closet and all of these other sorts of things. But I suspect that had we addressed this issue more up front, we would be further along. Now there's a very interesting article that I recommend to you that was written by the Commissioner of Health for Thomas Frieden from New York City. It appeared in the New England Journal about a year ago, when he argues that we should return to good public health principles that we have abandoned to an extent in this situation, which I think you have just articulated. Yes?
I think the key, well, one of the keys, I suppose, is education, and probably the public. If the public understands, you know, human rights, for example, before this 10 years ago, people kind of, you know, don't know the rights, or kind of know, but you know, don't want to bring it up with the doctors or the authorities. But I think the public realizes what they're entitled to, and in the meantime, the authority itself learns that they have to be compassionate or understand the issue from the other side, you know, empower the others. I don't like that word empower, but you know, the other side of the people who we refer to as the beneficiaries, people who are the victims, you know, don't call them victims, like, you know, victims of AIDS, victims of malaria. It just sounded so passive. I mean, they're just people. Just happen that they have malaria, so they know that they can say, they have the right to feel differently, to think differently, and the authority, the health people, feel the same way. then I think that might be a place to start. That's why I feel that education is the most important thing. Education of the new generation of public health people. People last year in the school about to go out and practice. Change the color of their shades. Take these glasses off, put a new pair on, seeing the world in the pink or blue differently. Maybe that will help. I think education is the key.
I do think it's important that we look at other examples. It's gone down quite significantly by confronting it right from the beginning. I mean, they once they made the decision, they took it on. Now, for within the Asian context itself, there to be much greater exchanges between experiences, between people think, well, if you just fly over an ocean, then you gain wisdom, or that if you that political boundaries stand in the way, and so on. I would submit that a meeting like this and more meetings like this will facilitate this exchange of ideas. I think this will be, we have one question here. Is there any other? And let's take two more questions. Please come to the mic here, and then we'll take two, and then we'll be over for this.
In public health, while the social, cultural, political situation, you hinted at that now, but I think lessons will be learned, and I think there's going to be a learning curve. Tsunami hit, nobody was prepared. We've learned lessons. So I think the issue is to learn from our mistakes and go forward.
Yes, I would agree with you. I think that, in fact, speaking of stigma, why did
accept that something is wrong with the situation? I mean, one simple example is, the widespread coliform contamination of water supply, even in urban areas due to secondary problems and all that secondary contamination. But somehow the authorities simply stonewall any attempt to tell that your water is not good. So unless we accept that a situation is wrong, something's wrong, how do we set it right? And how do we deal with that kind of a situation?
Well, I think that the best mid-80s, when in Calcutta it was first picked up, and yet 2 wells continued to be built, things continued to go on. Basically, nobody wanted to deal with it until the hue and cry became so great that they had no choice but to do it. I think that that's why we do research. That's why we get information out. That's why we argue for openness and transparency, so those things come out. And by the way, in today's world, it's harder to hide secrets. Everybody's got a video cam or camera or this and that. The days when you could keep everything under the rug are becoming more and more difficult. I got cameras on there. There's cameras everywhere. The cameras on your phone. There's cameras here. There's video. One day they're going to have a video camera that you can stick in your ear, and who the hell knows what's going to happen. But the idea of keeping secrets, I think, is going to become less and less possible, and we're going to confront these issues more and more earlier on. With that said, I'm sorry I spoke so much. Let me turn to my co-host here and ask you if you have any comment. Thank you all very much. And why don't you have the last word? She has her own microphone. There you go.
It's been a very good day, and it's a long day, we have to admit, but I think we have touched upon a few issues, and not necessarily that we have to agree on everything, but I think that's a spirit of science, and it's normal. I think we came from different backgrounds, and if you say that ethics is contextual, different cultures look at death, at abortion, at birth, at things like that differently, and I think we should appreciate that. And I think one of our speakers, I think it's the lady over here, said that compassion, caring, and understanding, tolerance is probably the key to all this. We don't have the answer yet, but I hope that the invitation that I have extended to all of you this morning has been taken under consideration, and if you'd like to do something, Richard will jump in at some point in time. So, public health ethics, maybe we have some future, and I'll call upon your help if necessary, okay? So today, we complete our WHO minutes over the time, as opposed to the other day, an hour, 15 minutes. So we should give a round of applause to ourselves. I think it was everybody's good job. Now we have the dinner on the second floor, and understand that you should be singing, otherwise you won't get your meal. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard.